Hey everybody, Jason Warner here, partner at Redpoint, former CTO at Github, back with another set of questions. Great feedback, great context on the first set. A lot of stuff coming in on various types of questions, from technical to company operations to even finance and fundraising. We're going to dive in with a couple of different ones here today. So this is a hot topic. Everyone wants to talk about this, but since cloud building has gotten easier over the last couple of years, should we learn to host by ourselves or completely rely on cloud service providers? If you're not an infrastructure company, just use cloud services. So let's just put an end to that debate. Now, if you're an infrastructure company and you're building systems for developers, nuance. GitHub plus some PaaS, 90% of all companies in the world should just start with that. Stay monolithic as long as possible in your team and your application structure, and invest in your automated workflows. Hands down, that will cover so many of your use cases. Infrastructure companies also build in the cloud. You don't need the CapEx. You don't need to spend all that money. You don't need to do all that sort of stuff. Eventually you might, but start out just validating the ideas. You might need to go sooner on-prem or with your own data centers or at the edge or some other topic that talks about non-cloud-based services in the future. You don't need to start there. So next question, how do you split a monolith into multiple services? I'd like to ask you if you actually really want to do this and why. Most people want to do it because they think they need to do that. That's not the answer I hope you want to give. But if you do, if you decide that you want to go down and you want to split your monolith into multiple services, a couple of things I want to caution you against. One, don't think microservices. Think applications, larger services. Don't go from one to hundreds. Go from one to a handful, 5 maybe. 2, think database first, application second. Most people are going to hit their limits in the database long before they're going to hit their application limits. And they look at the database later than they look at the application. This is a mistake in my opinion. Start looking at the database first. Think of the database as a monolith as well. You think about reads and writes, and you can think about the way the tables are structured and things of that nature. And then even with the database or the application, here's how I generally approach the problem. I think there's basically 2 ways to look at breaking down monoliths. One is you start with the riskiest element first, and you try to work your way through that, knowing that if you figure this out, the rest of it's going to be cake. Or you start with the simplest thing first, something you can pull off really easily and just get running with very little consequence. Either way you look at this is kind of like peeling an onion. My preferred method is to go the easier way first, pull off 1 or 2 services that are really simple, really dead easy to pull off. 1, I think is low-hanging fruit. 2, I think you gain confidence, experience, and knowledge. And 3, I think you retain the optionality to go to the harder services later. You start with the harder services, I think you're gonna end up in a 2-3 year project. Get the easier ones off the books first. You get the question, what would you pull off first? Here's a couple of simple ways to think about this. Think about what your core table structures look like. Let's say you've got a users table or a payments table or something that's basically at the heart of your application. It's going to be really difficult to unwind that right away. So that's where I would look at the database, is how I read data out of the table and write data into that table. That is actually where I would start thinking about different types of interactions with the database. But it's not the first place I'd pull stuff off. I'd go to something that is very seldomly used, maybe a lookup table of some sort, and then I'd start pulling those things off. You know exactly the type I'm talking about if you've ever interacted with your own application or databases. Those are really simple places that you can start looking at pulling these off. If you start pulling off the database, it's very obvious how you're going to start pulling those things off of the application as well. All right, next question, and I'll read it word for word here. How do you step away from the present challenges of building a business and a team and give yourself time to think about the future and where the market is heading? I have a tendency to feel anxious about what I'm not thinking about in the future. And at the same time, it can feel like an indulgence to think about the future when there's so many urgent things to take care of in the present. A lot of different ways we could take this. First, there's an absolutely fabulous image from DJ Patil that I pinned to my Twitter profile. I think everyone should just go look at and think about. What I really try to think about is that mission and vision drive everything in the present. So I really think it's not an indulgence to think about the future, it's a necessity. And you have to think 3 to 5 years out. And then you have to map out backwards to where you are right now. So it's very simple. Think out into the future, where you're supposed to be. Understand what your present and current situation, context, and circumstances are. Map a plan to 1 year out and how you're actually going to achieve those things. That right there will solve a large portion of all planning problems that most companies have. If you can take that a step further and break your 1 year plan down into 2, 3, 4 highest priority, riskiest, most existential items, and then give that to your team in terms of context, scope, full understanding of why these have hit these criticality levels for you, you've gone one step further than most Silicon Valley startups have ever do. And lastly, if you can take those things, those priorities, and roughly map them into, I want to say monthly, but even quarterly objectives, saying like, by the end of this quarter, we want to achieve this in that regard for that plan. And I'm not talking like deep detailed plans. I'm saying like grown X by Y, or finish this project, or launch this thing. Again, you've now gone one step further. But I absolutely 100% think it starts with the 3 to 5 year out plan. And your job as an executive is sometimes to step out of the day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, or even quarter-to-quarter and reevaluate all of these things.